Hello everybody, I am Evelil and I will tell you one story of a good viewing. Mike left his office building in the waning light of dusk, the city already cloaked in the somber hues of evening. He had always taken the same shortcut home, a narrow, unassuming street winding its way through a quiet suburban neighborhood. But tonight, something felt terribly different. The crisp autumn air carried an unsettling chill that whispered warnings to his hurried steps, as though the night itself harbored secrets best left undiscovered. At first, Mike dismissed the sensation as mere fatigue, a trick of a weary mind after a long day at work. Yet, as he rounded the corner onto that familiar street, a creeping disquiet began to gnaw at him. The normally comforting hum of evening life was absent, the only sound was the echo of his own footsteps reverberating off the pavement like a persistent, unnatural heartbeat. The street was dimly lit by sporadic, flickering street lamps that cast long, distorted shadows that seemed to stretch and contort in shapes no natural form should mimic. As he walked, Mike noticed that the familiar storefronts and tidy houses appeared subtly altered. Windows that once gleamed with welcoming light were now shrouded in darkness, curtains hung slack and lifeless, and doors stood slightly ajar as if inviting trespassers into secrets best forgotten. Every step revealed a slight but unnerving shift in detail. A cheerful family restaurant now bore a faded, cryptic symbol. A neat row of houses appeared as if viewed through a warped mirror. A creeping sensation told him that something was deeply, irrevocably wrong. 15 minutes into his journey, a disconcerting realization began to surface. Mike paused and turned around, only to see the same stretch of road receding into the distance, a long, unending corridor of pavement that looped back on itself with maddening precision. His pulse surged as he tried to retrace his steps, convinced he had taken a wrong turn. Yet, no matter how many corners he turned, the scene repeated, the same dimly lit street, the same silent houses standing as mute sentinels in the gloom. A cold sweat broke out along his brow as panic edged into his thoughts. The world around him seemed to slow, the oppressive silence punctuated only by the occasional rustle of dead leaves skittering across the pavement. Then, as if the silence itself were mocking his terror, an eerie whisper drifted on the wind, a soft, almost imperceptible murmur that might have been his own name, spoken in a voice both familiar and foreign. Mike's heart pounded as he quickened his pace, his eyes darting wildly from one end of the street to the other, desperately searching for any anomaly, a door ajar where none should be, a light left burning in an otherwise darkened window. That might hint at a way out of this nightmarish loop. Every block merged into the next with mechanical regularity. The identical, dilapidated houses lined the road like grim statues, their broken windows reflecting the flickering light as if they possessed eyes that tracked his every movement. It was as if he were trapped in an endless reel, doomed to repeat the same torturous passage over and over again. Then, as the shadows lengthened and the chill deepened, Mike caught sight of a figure at the far end of the street. At first, it appeared only as a vague outline under a flickering lamp, a solitary silhouette, standing unnaturally still. His pulse hammered in his ears as he advanced, desperate for answers. Yet, when he neared, the figure dissolved like mist in the cold air, leaving behind nothing but a lingering sense of dread and an echo of its silent presence. The more Mike walked, the more the street transformed from a simple path home into a labyrinth of terror. The pavement beneath his feet seemed to writhe with each step, its surface marked by deep, pulsing fissures that mimicked the rhythm of his accelerating heartbeat. The oppressive air grew thicker, laden with the scent of decay and long-forgotten secrets. Every corner he turned unveiled another layer of surreal horror, an impossible overlap of two realities, one of familiar decay, the other a disturbing, sterile perfection that mocked his desperate need for escape. A sudden violent crash shattered the silence, reverberating through the street like the tolling of a death knell. In that split second, a blinding flash of light illuminated everything, transforming the mundane facades of the houses into towering, twisted structures that seemed conjured from the darkest corners of a fevered nightmare. The architecture contorted into grotesque forms, and for a moment, the boundary between dream and waking life blurred into insignificance. As the light faded, Mike's mind reeled in disbelief. Had the street always harbored such malevolence, or was this a manifestation of a dark force now bending reality to its whim? The sudden transformation left him disoriented, stranded in a realm where time and space had lost all meaning. The oppressive gloom pressed in from all sides, and with it came a sense of inescapable doom. Every step forward felt like a descent deeper into a meticulously crafted trap, a trap designed not only to ensnare his body but to unravel his very mind. With trembling resolve, Mike pressed on, though each step was heavy with the knowledge that the endless street was no longer a familiar passage home but a sinister labyrinth of twisted architecture and relentless dread. As the unnatural silence resumed its grip and the night seemed to close in with unseen, judgmental eyes, he could only wonder what unspeakable horrors awaited him in the next shadowed corner of this eternal, nightmarish road. Further along, the pavement itself began to pulse with a disturbing rhythm, its cracks widening into jagged lines that exuded an almost palpable malevolence. It was in that moment, a moment suspended between terror and resignation, that Mike realized with bone-deep certainty he was not merely lost, but trapped in an endless, looping purgatory from which there might be no escape. The oppressive nightmare deepened with every tortured step. Mike's heart hammered as he staggered forward, the air around him thick with a palpable malevolence. The street, this unyielding, distorted loop, had mutated yet again, as if it were a living thing, hungry for his terror. Now, every stone of the pavement seemed inscribed with cryptic, ancient runes, and the very walls of the crumbling houses pulsated with a dreadful, rhythmic beat. It was no longer just a road home but a merciless passage into a realm where time dissolved and hope withered. Desperate to escape the relentless loop, Mike turned down a narrow, grimy alley that branched off from the main street. Here, the familiar glow of streetlights was replaced by a sickly luminescence that barely illuminated the decrepit surroundings. The alley walls were covered with peeling paint and bizarre symbols, their origins impossible to discern. In the distance, a faint, metallic clanging echoed like the toll of a long-forgotten bell, and the sound sent shivers racing down his spine. The alley twisted and turned, narrowing until Mike found himself facing a heavy, rusted door set into the brick. It beckoned him with an eerie promise of escape, yet the door also seemed to whisper warnings of unspeakable horrors lurking behind its barrier. With trembling hands and a mounting sense of doom, Mike pushed the door open. It groaned in protest, revealing a cavernous interior bathed in a ghostly light. The room inside was vast and utterly silent except for a slow, persistent thrum, as if the very floor was alive. Cracked mirrors lined the walls, each reflecting not only his terrified visage but also fleeting images of faceless figures and twisted, malformed silhouettes, phantoms of past wanderers lost to the endless cycle. The reflections seemed to move independently, their eyes wide with silent pleas and expressions contorted by eternal anguish. Mike stepped further inside, drawn by a perverse need to understand the force that held him captive. At the center of the room, atop a raised dais, lay an antique clock whose hands spun erratically. The sound of its tick-tock was overwhelming, drowning out rational thought with its hypnotic rhythm. It was as if the clock itself governed the macabre dance of the room, a dance of time unmoored from the natural order. The sight of it stirred a recollection in Mike's mind. A vague memory of warnings from an old urban legend, a tale of a cursed street where time and reality twisted together in a nightmarish embrace. Before he could dwell further on the legend, the ground beneath him shuddered violently. The antique clock's ticking accelerated into a frenzied beat, and a low, guttural hum emanated from the very walls. The mirrors began to warp, their surfaces rippling like disturbed water. In one mirror, Mike saw a reflection of himself, but not as he was now. The face in the glass was gaunt, eyes hollow and bleeding an otherworldly shade, as if it were the visage of someone long dead. The spectral image reached out, its fingers stretching toward him in a silent, desperate plea for salvation or perhaps a warning of doom. A sudden, ear-splitting shriek tore through the stagnant air, snapping Mike out of his morbid fixation. The sound reverberated through the room, and with it, the door slammed shut behind him, sealing him in a chamber of nightmares. Panic surged as the reality of his entrapment sank in. Every instinct screamed at him to flee, yet the oppressive weight of despair held him in place. The clock's erratic ticking mingled with the distorted murmurs of unseen voices, creating a dissonant symphony that clawed at the edges of his sanity. In a moment of desperate resolve, Mike turned to the only exit, a narrow, arching passage partially obscured by shadows. He forced himself toward it, his legs trembling with a mix of terror and determination. As he crossed the threshold, the temperature plummeted and the world outside the chamber seemed even more distorted. The endless street lay before him again, but it was different now. The road appeared to ripple and breathe as if it were a vast, living entity that had grown ever more malevolent. The familiar houses were gone, replaced by monstrous structures whose jagged edges and twisted forms defied natural geometry. Their windows glowed with an unnatural light as though concealing the tortured souls trapped within. Every step along this new stretch of the endless street felt like a descent into madness. The pavement was scarred by deep fissures that pulsed with a sickly, iridescent glow, each crack a vein in the monstrous heart of this unholy domain. Whispers rose around him, a cacophony of indistinct voices that spoke in fragmented syllables of despair, loss, and the inevitability of fate. Mike's mind teetered on the brink of collapse as the voices merged into one overwhelming chant, an unending dirge that spoke of eternal imprisonment and the futility of resistance. Then, as if the universe itself conspired to drive him over the edge, an abrupt silence fell. The voices, the humming clock, the pulsating pavement all vanished in an instant, leaving only a void of oppressive darkness. In that heavy silence, a single, disembodied voice spoke his name. It was soft at first, almost a caress, yet laced with a profound sorrow that chilled him to the bone. "Mike, come home," it whispered, a haunting invitation that blurred the line between menace and pity. With no alternative and driven by a mix of terror and longing, Mike followed the spectral call. His feet carried him to a place where the street curved around a towering, crumbling edifice, a structure so immense that its shadow swallowed the surrounding darkness. The voice grew louder as he approached, echoing from within the building's depths. There, at the threshold of an enormous, labyrinthine foyer, Mike paused. The interior was an abyss of blackness punctuated only by intermittent, ghostly glows that revealed hallways stretching into infinity. The air was thick with the scent of damp decay and forgotten memories. In that moment, Mike understood the terrible truth: the endless street was not a mere accident of twisted urban planning, but a deliberate prison, a purgatorial corridor designed to trap souls in an eternal cycle of dread and despair. As he stepped into the foyer, the door behind him closed with a resounding finality. There would be no escape from this haunted realm. The endless descent into madness had only just begun, and Mike was destined to wander these cursed halls, forever haunted by the echoes of lost souls and the relentless, creeping horror of a world where even hope was devoured by darkness. And so, in that unyielding void where time, space, and sanity intertwined, Mike's fate was sealed. The endless street, an ever-shifting nightmare, continued its silent, inexorable march, promising that every step taken in its depths was a step further away from salvation, a step deeper into the inescapable arms of oblivion. Thank you very much and see you all in the next video. Love you guys.